Restaurant employees, what actually happens when someone doesn't have enough to pay the bill? Most you've ever seen? I delivered for Domino's Pizza in the early 2000s. I took an order to go to an apartment complex on the edge of town. When I arrived, the front door was wide open. I knocked on the door and I heard a voice telling me to come in. I walked into the apartment and made my way to the living room. There was a man sitting on the ground. A wheelchair was on the other side of the room. I asked if he was okay, and he told me he had to sleep on the floor because he didn't have a bed. I looked around the apartment and noticed he had no furniture. He only had an overhead light and nothing else. I pulled his order out of the bag and told him the price. He then told me he had no money but hadn't eaten in a few days. I was new at the job and didn't know what the policy would be for something like this. I told him I couldn't give him his pizza and apologized over and over. He told me he understood and I left. When I got back to the store, I told the manager about what happened. He asked me if I wanted to give the guy the pizza. I told him I did, but I didn't want to get into trouble. He told me it was okay because he knew I believed the guy and also because of the guy's living situation. The manager walked over to a computer and deleted the order. He then told me to grab a few cans of soda and some wings that were never picked up. He then told me we couldn't do this all the time, but there were times when it was the right thing to do, and I could make that decision the next time. I drove back over to the guy's house and knocked on the open door again. He told me to leave the door open because it helped keep the apartment cool. I was called into the apartment and saw the guy was still on the floor. He saw that I was still carrying his order and his face lit up. I told him I was bringing his food back along with some other things, and he was so thankful. He told me this food would last him a week and asked me to put everything on the counter. The man then proceeded to thank me. I apologized and told him I wanted to help, but I didn't know if it was okay. We talked a bit before I had to go back to work. The whole interaction made me sad. The guy was really nice, but was handed a tough card in life. He never ordered from us again, and I have no idea what happened to him. I wish I had checked on him at least one more time, but I didn't, and I kind of regret it. So his first instinct was to be kind. He should be very, very proud of himself. I am. Story 2. A table shortchanged me $30, leaving me $120 in cash on a $150 tab. I went to the manager asking what to do. He told me I could pay the difference to make the check whole, or they'd mark the shortage as a walkout and I'd get written up. I asked what would have happened if they left me nothing and just walked out. The manager's response was, same two options. Since I wasn't going to pay the difference from my tips and was going to get written up anyway, I told him, my bad. They walked out on the entire tab. I'll take the write-up. I pocketed the $120 in cash and got written up. Story 3. I used to be a server and had this table with 4 guys. Their bill came up to be somewhere around $52 and some change. I brought them the bill, and when I went to collect it, the guys were gone and there was only $50 cash on the table. I told my manager and he removed something from their bill and cashed it out so I would still get something for a tip. It was definitely a lousy thing for those guys to do, but thankfully I had a good manager that made sure it wouldn't come out of my pocket. Story 4. I own a few restaurants, so it depends. If someone walks out on the bill and it's small, I just write it off and go on with my day. If it's big, we file a police report. Nothing's ever come of those reports as they're usually tourists from out of state anyway. And by the way, making staff pay for it is both illegal and unethical, so we don't do that. A few times a customer has stated they can't pay, which has caused a bit of a negotiation. Once it was a clearly homeless man who just said he has no money and that was it. I told him, no big deal, he was just hungry and off he went. Didn't see him again. Another was someone who rang up a whole tab drinking and decided to not give a care and flat out refused to pay. He looked more interested in starting a fight rather than getting out of his bill. The police came and suddenly his wallet was out though. The most I've lost on a walkout was about $100. It's pretty rare in my area to have such problems. 90% of my problems are dealing with weirdos and crazies like the pretend health inspector we had come by. Also, side note, my bartender got swindled on a fake $100 bill one time. It was annoying, but I absorbed the costs and I retrained the staff on spotting them. The next day, the same guy shows up and says, did you guys get some funny money yesterday? I had a joke bill in my wallet and might have accidentally used it, so that was nice of him. Story 5. In my experience, it depends on the situation. If someone ran out on a small check, we usually ended up doing nothing, but you'd be banned if you ever dared to show up again. Some customers would apologize and promise to come back and pay. We would generally just let them go, especially if they were a regular. More often than not, they did come back and pay. Even people who straight up refused to pay would generally just be banned. I remember my manager calling the police just once on someone trying to walk out after racking up a huge check, and getting into a screaming argument with my manager when he tried to stop him. Story 6. This happened with my dad. He was ordering food at a drive-thru in a storm and the electricity shut off as a transformer got hit by lightning. Dad waited in the drive-thru for a few minutes as the manager told him the generator usually kicks on and he can pay with a card. Well, the generator was busted and my dad had no cash. The manager was nice enough to give him the food no charge, but my dad was insistent he pay for it. The manager told him it's okay and it was just an act of God occurrence. Well, this didn't stop my dad. He drove next door to a grocery store, took some cash out, and drove back with the cash in hand. A $20 order turned into $40 for the drive-thru workers as a tip. He became a priority customer after that one. Story 7. I was a customer once. I went out to eat and definitely thought I had enough for the bill and a decent tip. I didn't, and I was all cash back then, no card to fall back on. I was horrified. I told the server I was short. She was so nice, said I didn't have to tip. I was like, I don't even have enough for the bill. She was still cool about it. I said I'd be right back. Not sure if she believed me, but I went home and grabbed the emergency cash and went right back. I settled up and gave her a great tip. She ribbed me a few times when I went back, but it was all in fun. Story 8. I've only had this happen maybe 3 times in my 25 years in the industry. 2 were regulars and they made it good later and made sure to leave extra for the servers. The other was banned because he was a lousy, busted, never do well, and he was no longer welcomed in one of the last bars in town that would offer him service. I miss the days when local bars and restaurants had a good relationship with each other, and we would call and ask about a certain patron, and either the manager or the bartender would be the first person to tell you if they were a troublemaker, or they'd just call ahead and warn you that this person was on the way to your place and we just wouldn't serve them. Story 9. I'm not a restaurant employee, but I can tell you what happened to me at Longhorn. The machine declined my bank card, so I told the waitress I was going across the street to get cash from the ATM. My wife never left the table. The manager came out and informed my wife that the cops had been called and they were trespassing her from the property. So she got up and walked outside at their insistence. I got back at the same time the cops showed up. I explained to the cops what happened. The waitress was horrified by the manager's response. I was asked to never return and didn't pay a dime. I complained to the Longhorn corporate, and they sent me twice my bill and gift cards with an apology note. I have never been back. Story 10. The manager comes out and tries to work something out. They will try and get you to call someone who can give payment over the phone. If you can't do that, they'll try and hold something as collateral, like your ID, to get you to come in tomorrow and pay. I've never seen them call the cops, and having you wash dishes is all Hollywood. Besides it taking too long to train you, it's in violation of a million labor laws and OSHA laws. If they truly cannot get a payment, they comp the meal and ban you from returning. My expertise is low to mid-casual dining, no idea what happens at high-end establishments. Story 11. My wife and I went out to Red Lobster about 15 years ago, when it was still pretty decent. When the waiter brought her bill, I realized I didn't have my wallet on me. At the time, my wife didn't carry her money if I was with her, and it was before you could pay with a phone. I apologized, and my wife went home to get her money, roughly a 30 to 40-minute drive round trip. It just so happens that this was endless shrimp season. The waiter kept bringing shrimp out every 5 minutes, and even though I told him not to, he kept delivering. I was so stuffed, but I didn't want to waste it. He got a big tip. To this day, that was the best service I ever received in a restaurant. Story 12. I wasn't the restaurant employee in this situation, but during college, I worked 2 jobs and lived with my parents. On their wedding anniversary, I wanted to surprise them with their favorite meals from a local restaurant. My dad loves seafood, so I ordered him a lobster tail dinner that was listed at quote-unquote market price. I've never ordered lobster before, and I didn't know what market price meant. I went to the restaurant to pick it up, but I didn't have enough money to pay for it. I didn't know what to do, so I offered the hostess all of my money, which was around $40. She didn't know what to do either, and she went in the back to get the manager. I was a nervous wreck and started crying. The manager came out and I explained to him what happened. He ended up taking my money and letting me keep the food. I felt horrible after. I was such an idiot. Story 13. A lady and her 4 kids walked into our pizza/salad bar place. She had bruises all over her arms and the kids looked scared. She asked me what she could get for $10 just to feed her kids. I paid for them to have unlimited salad bar out of my pocket, asked the kids what their favorite pizza was. I went in the back and made it for them. She kept apologizing for how loud her kids were and asked how long she could be there. The kids weren't loud at all. They all just seemed scared. When I brought a pizza for the kids, I told her I wanted to show her something at the salad bar she might like. And once out of earshot of the kids, I asked if she was okay, in danger, or needed to call anyone. She just started crying and thanked me. Her mom was going to pick them up, but they were some distance away. She asked if she could hug me, and I said yes, because she needed it. I have a woman who hates being touched, but I understand that some people need hugs. I never saw her again, and I just hope she got away from whoever was hurting her. Story 14. Okay, so this is going to take a bit. This all happened in 1988. So I was in jail for a short time for something minor, just a weekend stay. Anyway, I heard on the TV in the day room that the police had been called last night because someone was up in a tree with a fork. A fork? The next night, I had a new guy in my cell, and it was the guy with the fork. So he tells me the rest of the story. He went into this pizza/pasta place intending to dine and dash. He was eating pizza and drinking and was getting pretty intoxicated. The manager comes over and says they wouldn't serve him anymore and he had to pay and leave. So this guy jumps up and grabs a waitress and a fork off the table. I guess the knife was too far away to get. He holds the fork at the girl's neck and backs out of the restaurant. Once outside, he lets the girl go and starts running up the road. The manager is running next to the guy and tells him that he, the manager, ran marathons on the weekend and the guy wasn't going to get away. So the guy decides to climb a tree to get away from the manager. He still has the fork and is threatening the manager with it. The cops come and surround the tree and tell the guy to come down and drop the fork. The guy says, "Screw you, go ahead and shoot me." By the way, this is in Canada, so the cops don't shoot him. Finally, he gets tired of hanging from the tree and comes down. They put him in remand for the rest of the weekend, which is where I got the story from him. Story 15. I worked at a diner in college. My pay was about $5 an hour. I often worked the mid-afternoon shift, so if I was lucky, I would go home with $40, including my salary. One afternoon, the diner was empty. I was replacing the ice in the soda machine, filling some salt shakers, and chatting with the line cooks, typical stuff. A woman comes in, clearly disheveled and shaken. She orders the cheapest thing on the menu, a grilled cheese or tuna sandwich, maybe a soda. Time comes to pay the bill, and she's hunting through her purse, swearing she had a 20 on her. She said, "I must have left my card at home. Can I leave you my license as collateral?" I said, "Please, it's on me." As someone who was making $5 an hour and I felt bad for her, I knew I was lucky. The worst part is that comes out of my check, not the restaurant's. So I worked 2.5 hours for free to make sure she could eat, and I'm still proud of that to this day. Story 16. I had the opposite happen. The waiter walked out on me. We were at a cheap Italian restaurant eating on the patio. We got there early, so one waiter was covering the entire patio. But after he served us our food and wine, a second waiter came on and covered our part of the patio. We finished and asked for the check. The waiter now covering us said that it wasn't his table. We said that the other waiter served us and could that waiter give us the bill. The original waiter also claimed that he wasn't our server. Finally, we got tired of waiting for people to figure it out, so we tried to recall the prices of what we ordered, added 25% to cover tip and tax, and left the cash on the table. Story 17. A couple of years ago, I was working as a waiter at a sushi restaurant. Occasionally, we had company conferences at the hotel across the street, and we would get flooded with people at lunch and dinner. One night, a group of 5 or 6 people attending a conference in town came over to dine. They ordered like $300 worth of food, and I was the only one waiting their table. They were nice and very professional. Then I took my eyes off for 1 minute, and they left without paying. I took the bill and ran over to the hotel lobby and hoped I could catch one of them, but it was in vain. None of the hotel staff knew who I was trying to find. I didn't even have a name. I was so afraid of having to pay the bill out of my own pocket. I was still in college, and it was worth like 3 shifts of work. I came back to the restaurant, stood by their table, and just stared into space. The other customers asked me what was wrong, and I told them a group left without paying, and I didn't know what to do. The owner kept the bill open and didn't make me pay for it. Turns out the customer that asked me what was wrong found one of the guys at that table. The next day, he came over to pay and apologize. He said there was some banter, and the other group said they would pay for his group, so they left. I got a big tip in the end. Story 18. One of my coworkers had a couple who literally ran out on a busy night, and my coworker ran after them and tried to knock on their car window, but they just drove off and almost ran her over. The table was only like $71, and the owner knew it wasn't her fault after watching the cameras and let her void the check. She proceeded to blast their photos all over local Facebook groups. It was a fairly small town, and someone told us they were at the Airbnb next to her house. We called the cops, and they got arrested and fined like $500 each. So always pay your tabs because they might come after you. Story 19. I've seen dine and dashers bounce on a $100 plus bill. License plate was taken and cops called. No idea what happened. When I was a GM at a pizza place, sometimes kids or regulars might come in and be a little short of money, so I adjust the specials to make it work. Depending on who it was, I might add a note on their account. If it was someone I'd never seen or with a note indicating a habitual behavior, then I just tell them sorry, and the crew would eat the loss. In the sit-down restaurant, we'd get a manager, and it would depend on the manager as to what they do. Generally, it involved trying to give some special or a discount to knock the price down. If they had absolutely no money, then they might want to take something of value as a deposit or have one party member stay while the other went to get money. It was before smartphones were a thing, but phones and pagers existed. Those were often the items. Story 20. Back when I was a barista, there was plenty of flexibility. If you were apologetic, I'd absolutely comp your order. If you were rude, sorry, policy requires payment. I had one gentleman come through the drive-thru and show me his phone had gone out, so he couldn't use the app or gift card to pay for his drink. He wasn't necessarily rude, but shrugged and expected me to do something about it. Nope, I'm not taking responsibility for your phone, that's on you. He didn't want to use another method of payment, so I gave him the free cup of water he ordered and maintained eye contact while dumping his drink in the sink. For anyone else, I would have absolutely handed them their entire order and just voided it in the computer or applied a discount to make it free. At least apologize and ask if you can pay next time. And then I tell you not to worry about it, it's on us this time, but expecting a free drink, I won't entertain that. Story 21. My manager did the coolest thing last week in this situation. My table's card was expired, so they tried 2 different cards with me and they both came back declined. They spent 30 minutes after getting the check figuring out a card to use. They only had the cards on their phone or how to get the money into their accounts. I told my manager, I don't think they're going to walk out because they've been spending 30 minutes trying to figure this out. And she went over and offered to cover their bill. She just said things happen and called it good karma. And my manager gave me what would have been 20% of the check in cash so I didn't lose out on a tip for her generosity. She's never done that before, so it's not a regular thing. The check was $35 for 2 of them. And if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 22. I was working a job out of state with 5 or so guys. We went to lunch at this nice deli. They were having trouble with the register, so they told us to pay before we left. We went outside and ate, shot the breeze a while, and then left. I was thinking that night and didn't remember paying. I hit up the guys on the group chat. Did we forget to pay today? So the next day we went back to the same place for lunch and they had forgotten also. So we all just ordered the same thing as the day before and paid twice. They seemed shocked we had come back. They loaded us up on our sandwiches and gave us free cookies. Story 23. I delivered pizza for a number of years and one of the local town drinkers came in and said, I'd like to order a pizza for delivery, and me. He said his wallet was at his house, so I asked who wanted to take him and the risk of getting stiffed. One of my friends, built like a linebacker, agreed to take him. When they got there, the drinker said, I'll take the pizza in and grab my wallet. My friend said, no way, and that he should get the wallet first. The drinker pauses for a moment, then says, I'll fight you for it. My friend agrees. The guy screams no and sprints into his house, pizzaless. So, in answer to your question, nothing happened and we ate his pizza that night. Story 24. Not an employee, but we were poor when I was a kid, but my mom still wanted to treat me and my sister. Now, if you've gone through my history, you'll also find that during my childhood, she fought a glioblastoma, the mother of all brain tumors. Anyway, we didn't have a lot, but my mom takes us to McDonald's or Burger King, I forget which. So we go inside to eat and order, and my mom just gets us whatever. I honestly forget. I do remember my mom never ordering. Me and my sister always brought it up, and she'd just be like, it's fine, baby, I might have a fry or 2. The kid behind the counter understood something that I didn't. We get our food and sit down, and after a few minutes, the fellow comes over and says something like, hey guys, someone just canceled their drive-thru order. Would you like to have it? Mom obviously said no thank you, and he said, well, I don't want to throw it away, so if y'all don't really want it now, then have it later, or you can throw it away, just don't do it here, and laughed, making the joke about, I work so hard, someone must eat my masterpiece. My mom did end up eating it. I never forgot that, man. I'm not sure why it stuck with me as a kid. I honestly, at the time, thought it was just really lucky and was thrilled we got lucky like that pretty often. As an adult, when I worked in service, unless they were obviously messing around, I would literally just comp whatever they didn't have money for. Made my days easier. I don't care if you dine and dash, I am not paying for your food. It shouldn't matter, but I feel like we are at such great odds with one another. It is worth mentioning the races involved. We were white, and the gentleman and my personal hero was a young African-American teen. We were probably just a blip in his life and insignificant. He's just a good man. I've never forgotten his kindness or the many times we got extras. Story 25. I took a couple of friends out for dinner one night. We were celebrating and I was paying. We went somewhere quote-unquote nice and it was not cheap. The bill comes, I get my wallet and find it empty. No driver's license, no cash, no credit cards, nothing. Completely empty. Once I finished panicking, I spoke with the manager. He let us leave with nothing more than my signature promising to come back with cash. I got home, yelled at my husband. It was not his fault. He was just handy. Took his card to the ATM and ended up tipping $50 on a $100 bill. This was some years ago. Later, I discovered my coworker had helped himself to my wallet as a quote-unquote prank. Story 26. I've had a few occasions that were around $150, And it was during a time, 2009 to 2015-ish, when the server was expected to pay out of pocket. Now this meant that I would walk with basically nothing at the end of the night for a full 10 hours of work. One time, a guy tried to walk out on the bartender, so I went after him out the door to tell him to pay his tab. The guy was crazy. He saluted in the middle of the empty street while I was talking to him, quickly walked back towards me to the door, and poked me with his keys in my back. I do not remember if he paid. It turns out it was a single Yungling draft. And when I lifted my shirt, I quickly realized he didn't poke me with keys. It was a small Swiss Army knife that he hit me with. It was not even close to a serious injury, but still. The cops were called, and the investigator called me a few days later, pleading with me not to press charges, given that he was a vet with PTSD. Having served, I understood in a way, and there was no real damage done, so I let it go. My boss asked, "Why are servers chasing after people not paying for tabs like that?" Well, dude, I thought, because you make us pay it, and I didn't know how big or small the tab was until later. I now own a restaurant and am well aware that the practice of making your employees pay for walkouts is both illegal and a recipe for disaster, especially in certain edge cases. We always get a card on file, physically or in the POS, unless it's a regular to a degree that we know where they lived. It sucks, but the employer has to eat it and implement better safeguards. Securing payment channels should be on the employer and dummy-proof on the employee side. No one should have to come to a job that demanding 4 long hours through the night and then roll the dice on whether or not they make a living. Story 27. I had a woman come in and order around $60 of food and drinks over a 4-hour period. She came in for dinner, stayed to play trivia. When I brought the bill, she said, "Well, what if I can't pay?" In a joking manner, I said, "Oh, we just called the cops," and smiled at what I thought was a joke. When I came back around to collect payment, she confirmed that she could not pay. So I talked to the owner to confirm that I should call the cops, and he agreed. I told her, "If you do not pay for your bill right now, I'll be phoning the police," and she said, "Okay," and just sat there. I called the police, and they showed up in about an hour. She waited the whole time, and I didn't forcibly keep her there or anything. I was shocked she didn't run. I explained everything to the cops, and they charged her for theft by fraud, which essentially means ordering goods and services with no intent to pay for them after receiving goods and services. 2 years later, I got called to court in that city to testify even though I'd moved. I drove 2 hours to show up, paid by the court, only to be told by the lawyers that I wasn't needed, and was informed by her lawyer that they were rolling all her charges into one. I suggested that I simply be able to punch that unpleasant woman as hard as I could, just once in the face to rectify all the charges, but her lawyer said, "Well, that might be what you think she needs, but it isn't what she'll get." In the end, I'm not sure if I was more angry at her for the initial waste of time or the secondary one, largely her lawyer's fault, but she wasn't some down-on-her-luck person scamming a meal. She was a well-dressed woman with hair and nails done who ordered expensive wine and could afford a lawyer. Story 28. We had an older gentleman come in late one night. We knew something was up when he arrived as he had a head wound that appeared to still be fresh, and he denied any form of assistance with it. He also sent back 3 different kinds of service bread to begin his meal. At the end, he claimed he had no way to pay and claimed he had informed us of this when he sat down. He, of course, did not. We tried briefly to reason with him, but eventually called the non-emergency line as he had run up a $400 tab. They informed us it was, in fact, an emergency, and we dialed 911 and had police on the scene in about 20 minutes. They spoke with the man for a few minutes until a social worker arrived and it was clear the man was in crisis. They convinced him to leave the restaurant in an ambulance, and we did a house comp, which means we essentially ate the cost of his check. Story 29. Once I delivered pizza to a row house in a bad neighborhood to a woman clearly strung out, bouncing around the place, and a baby lying on the floor crying. There was barely any furniture in the house. It was cold. She was so skinny and malnourished. I felt so bad for her and the child. This was clearly a stash house. She tried to pay with a check. We didn't take checks, and then she asked how to spell 11. I stepped outside and called my boss and said, "This one is on the house." I left the food, took the check, and left. Got back to the shop and explained the situation. My boss understood and ripped up the check. Sometimes $50 just ain't worth it. Story 30. There was a 12-top. 8 were high school kids. They ate like they were passing away of starvation, and then the kids left. Then one of the adults left, so there were 3 adults left who said they weren't paying all the bills. They claimed they had 1 kid there for dinner, but the others were their kids' friends, so they weren't going to pay. Our manager said, "Call them back. They need to pay." They again said, "We don't know them." And our manager said, "Well, your kid knows them, so you'd better get them all back to pay the bills or we are calling the police." The bills in total were something around $600 or $700. The three adults that were left ended up splitting it all. Absolutely wild. Story 31. I've got a great story about this. I owned a small steakhouse on Nantucket about 20 years ago. The island is known for its extremely wealthy summer residents and visitors. One night, a large family of about 10 people came in for dinner, and they were awful. The young kids were running around, causing trouble. The parents were entitled and messy, and the patriarch of the family, sitting at the head of the table, was a self-righteous smug that looked and acted like Judge Elihu Smales. The bill comes to the table, and everyone very quickly shuffles out and into their cars and cabs except the patriarch. He's casually waiting behind, holding onto the check, and everyone else leaves. He casually saunters over to me at the bar and nonchalantly says, "I forgot my wallet. I'll swing by next week to take care of this." "Excuse me, sir, are you unable to pay your bill?" My response made him super irritated, and he angrily quipped back, "I can obviously pay my bill. I'm on a 100-foot yacht in the harbor. Of course I can pay for dinner. How dare you speak to me like that? Where is the owner?" "I am the owner," I quickly responded. "And I don't know who you are or where you're from. You're paying the bill or we have to call the police. Do you understand?" He started fumbling a bit with the ums and ahs, saying that the police wouldn't be necessary and he's obviously good for it. And just at that moment, my quick-witted bartender appeared behind me and coolly suggested, "Why don't you leave that Rolex as collateral? I'm sure that would cover the cost of your meal." The sudden look of defeat on this man's face was wild, like he was really thinking he was going to get away with a free $1,000 plus meal for 10 people. He called his wife, who came back to the restaurant in a cab about 15 minutes later. He spread the bill over 2 credit cards. Story 32. Customer here, but my coworker once walked on a 5-figure bar tab. Our company got bought out and the new owner's rules barred paying for alcohol. So what they did for parties was a bit weird. They pay in full for the venue, the food, and the non-alcoholic drinks, but run a cash bar. But not really. The first quarter, under the new no alcohol rule, one of the sales weasels, the one that got the biggest bonus, stepped up and paid everyone's tab. After that, whichever sales weasel was getting the biggest bonus had it inflated specifically to cover the tab at that quarter's party. Anyway, the winning weasel goes to pay at like midnight and his Amex is declined with an error for something like $15,000. So it was his wife's. They make some calls, the cards are fine, they try again, nada. It's been like half an hour, everyone else is long gone, no one is answering their cell phone, and he's only got the one card and $300 cash. The manager finally makes the decision to call the owner and ask what he wants to happen. Well, it turns out the owner had made some changes with their payment processor the week before, dropped Amex, and then didn't tell anyone. So they let him walk, and he came back in the morning with cash. Story 33. Not a restaurant, but my dad used to manage a petrol station. In South Africa, the petrol attendant pumps your petrol for you, and you generally pay after they pump the petrol or diesel. There were many times where people couldn't pay or forgot wallets or whatever, and this was like '05, '06, so no cards on your phone, etc. So people would pay with sunglasses, watches, not crazy valuable, basically anything of value in the car or on more than one occasion, a digital camera. Most times the people would come back the next day and pay the bill and get their things back, but half the time they didn't bother or they weren't from the town, so my dad paid the petrol difference and kept the items. This is how we got our first family camera. Story 34. I used to manage a pizza store. Sometimes when I rang up a customer's card, they wouldn't have enough on it to pay. I always just accepted what they had and never told them the difference because I know a lot of them were struggling with money. We also had a community special where anyone could come in and ask for a large cheese and they'd get one for free, no questions asked. When the pizza business was sold to a new owner, that was the one request I made for the new owner manager to keep the community special going. I really hope they still are. One of my favorite things about the pizza place was feeding people. I miss it every day. Story 35. 2 notes. Usually people don't admit they can't pay, they just dine and dash. Or if their card doesn't work, they'll make a call and beg a friend. But one time I saw this happen because a guy sat at the bar, ate his food, and drank for a few hours, maybe 8 beers, and then just admitted he couldn't pay. He looked maybe homeless, so he didn't have an ID. They let him know that since the bill was super high and it was alcohol, they'd have to call the police. In my city, the police aren't prioritizing this type of petty crime, so they took over an hour to arrive. The man calmly waited, then asked if he could leave. My manager said he shouldn't leave, but technically there's nothing we could have done to make him stay. So he got up and left. The police came long after he took off. My boss angrily explained to us that this is why we need to ask for an ID even if the person appears of age for alcohol, no matter what, and put a card down on the tab before serving them. In my experience, though, most people will just sneak out. The restaurant should compensate you for the missed tip, but most won't. I've never heard of anywhere actually taking the stolen food out of the server's paycheck, contrary to what people say. Story 36. Not an employee, but there was a time when I tried to treat a couple of, now ex-friends, out to dinner, but told them I was extremely limited on cash. One friend understood and ordered light, while the other ordered something more pricey and mentioned they'd help if needed. When it actually came time to pay, that quote-unquote friend dipped out and went home to avoid helping while I was left struggling. The waitress who served us eventually told me not to worry about the rest of the change, that she would use some of her tip money, and we mentioned to the manager what happened. The next time I went back, I had given her back the money she used to help pay my bill and thanked her sincerely. Story 37. Years ago, I used to work in the kitchen at a bar called Chill Coot Charlie's. One night, some unpleasant person reached over the counter and grabbed a whole meal. When I turned around and noticed what he'd done, he laughed in my face and asked what I was going to do about it while gesturing to his 2 or 3 buddies. There are 2 things I don't think he counted on. The bouncers at Coots in those days did not mess around. I fed the bouncers for free. He got bounced out that night and was given the choice to either pay up, including a tip, or getting bounced would be a permanent 86, a ban. He paid willingly, and his buddies were angry that he had gotten them all kicked out. Never saw him again. Story 38. When I was a manager, I had a guy come in 3 days in a row for lunch by himself. He was a really nice guy. He tipped well and pre-bussed his area, hugely appreciated by servers, by the way. He'd sit at the bar and eat, and we'd chat with him. I found out he was moving here and came early, getting the new house ready for the moving trucks and the family. The 4th day, he had his wife with him, equally as nice, so I picked up their tab as a welcome to the neighborhood gift. The truck was coming the next day, Friday, so he said we wouldn't see them. But come Saturday around 4, here he comes with like 11 family members that came to help. They had a great time, servers loved them, everything was great. Then the bill came. Nothing terrible, maybe $450, $500. The guy hands over his credit card, declined. Try it again, declines again. The server comes to get me, I try and it declines again. Now comes the hard part. I hated telling folks this, especially in front of the table, so I tell him that the CC company wants a phone verification since it's not in his usual city. That was a logical excuse to get him away from the table. I explain the issue, ask if he has another card, etc. He doesn't. He's very apologetic and embarrassed. I tell him not to sweat it. I'll comp the meal, and if he can bring a new form of payment in, great. If not, it was nice meeting him and congratulations on the new house. Another member of the party was insisting on leaving the tip, so the servers were well taken care of. Cut to the next day. The guy is waiting at the door at 8 a.m. with an envelope of cash covering the bill and another $100 for the servers. The dude became a regular with the wife and kids, did every birthday and anniversary with us from then on until the company closed us up. Story 39. We used to have these 2 dudes come in. They'd be in every night for weeks, and we wouldn't see them for a month, and then they'd be back. They worked for the power company. One time they came in and realized they left their credit card at the hotel and they only had enough cash to taxi back to the hotel. The waitress told them she'd cover the bill and they promised they'd be back the next day. They'd order a couple of burgers and beer, so she used her tips from that night to pay. They came in the next night and it was her night off. The owner happened to be in, and for some reason he got mad that the waitress covered their bill. He called her up and fired her. Now mind you, he got paid for their order. I felt so bad for her because she was helping out regular good customers of ours. Another time we had a couple of kids in and they were so polite and literally counting change before they ordered to make sure they'd have enough to leave a tip. We may have messed up an order of fries and gave them free soda because all they could afford was 2 side salads and water. They were the nicest kids, so it was worth it. Story 40. Not a restaurant employee, but I wasn't able to pay once. I took my girlfriend out for sushi to celebrate her first big paycheck. My card declined. After swiping, tapping, and jiggling my card a few times with no luck, I left my girlfriend there and ran to the other side of this huge shopping center to the ATM machines and tried to withdraw money for over 20 minutes, but it wouldn't let me. Turns out my bank blocked me from using my money until I could prove where it came from. I've never heard of that before or since. I made my way back to the sushi place, asked for a manager, the owner came out. I explained the situation to him and he said, "Don't worry about it, we've got it this time. Next time you come back, just give your waiter a big tip." Story 41. Used to work at a mid-range restaurant in a touristy area. Once had a guy try to pay a $150 bill with a Blockbuster gift card. When I told him we couldn't accept that, he said, "Well, it's vintage, that should count for something." If someone genuinely forgets their wallet or card, we usually take an ID and have them fill out a form. Most of the time, they actually come back or send money. People aren't always awful, just sometimes. The craziest one, a table of 6 ran up a $600 bill with drinks, appetizers, steaks, and desserts, the whole works, then just dashed. One guy slipped on the way out and dropped his phone. We called his mom. And if any of these stories got to you too, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.